no mai haere mai, tutawa mai runga, tutawa mai raro, tutawa mai waho, tutawa mai roto, kia tau ai te Maori tū, te Maori ora ki te katoa, homi e, hui e, tai ki e. Tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki tēnei hui. Welcome everybody to this hui today, and welcome to the people that are watching on live stream. We have about 10 people watching from as far north as Auckland and down in Otago. They saw it advertised on our volunteering website and they signed up, which we're really happy to have. So welcome aboard all the people on live stream. If there's just quickly, if there's a fire, if the fire alarm goes off, there's the exit there through that door and a second door and out, and we meet across the road over there. No, over that way. That way? That way. I always get turned around in buildings. It's really hard. Okay, I'd like to welcome Matt, our presenter for today. Matt is a counsellor and intake coordinator at Presbyterian Support in Ashburton and a former colleague of mine, and it's a real pleasure to have Matt come along with this presentation today. And working behind the camera for the live stream is Connor McComish, and Connor is just starting a new business as an IT person, and he's done one live stream for me previously, and this is his second one, both of which are free, but we actually want to get him some money soon. So he's going into the business, and this is his first really business one today. So welcome, Connor, and thank you for coming and doing it today as a volunteer. Connor is also one of our volunteers at Volunteering Mid and South Canterbury, and he volunteers at Presbyterian Support. He started there when he was 14, came along to do about 20 hours of community service for his Duke of Edinburgh Award, and he's still there 5 years later, helping out, and a really keen youth volunteer. I call him my youth ambassador. Yeah. I hope you'll enjoy the presentation today. Matt is going to talk about boundaries, personal and professional, and in my time in working in the community as we do, and as I have for 10 years, 11 years now in Ashburton, while I've been here, I've noticed that understanding what your boundaries are and where to stop and say, pass it on to somebody else, that's really, really important as we work in this field. It's so easy to go above and over the top, which is often seen as a good thing, but it's also something that could cause a lot of burnout or even harm to some people if we don't realise where we have to stop, stay in our lane, stay inside our boundaries. So I'm just going to pass it on over to Matt now.
All right. Kia ora, and thank you. Kia ora, tēnā koutou katoa, ko Matt Rainey toka wingoa. I'm Matt, and thank you, Muriel, for that introduction. Today I wish to introduce you, haere mai, to boundaries, personal and professional. Now, I don't bring this today as an expert in this field. What I do bring is a mixed and varied career experience, 30 years counselling. But that 30 years counselling also included a mixed variety of other roles, both as teaching and statutory and law enforcement. So my career in 30 years and what I've found useful and helpful in managing and learning about how to manage my own boundaries professionally and personally. And this is the information that I'd like to share with you today. So by all means, if we could just pop the lights, give that a go. Thanks, Muriel. So today, what I wish to discuss is, what is a boundary? What do they do for me? And the types and range of boundaries that exist. Our sensitivity to boundaries, what lands on our radar and how it lands. Signs of what unhealthy boundaries look like. And also a wee video on consent. And a word of warning here, the first 10 to 15 seconds, the F word is used at least on 2 occasions. So by all means, exercise your right to block your ears or mute your buttons for just that period of time if that is a concern to you. Then signs of healthy boundaries, steps to setting boundaries, how to go about that, how to instill what is right for you, and restoring your boundaries. It may be that over a period of time you may have compromised or just loosened up a little bit to accommodate others' needs. This is how to restore those boundaries that are healthy and good for you and others. And to finish up, a bit of a prickly conversation on porcupines. So what is a boundary? Boundaries are imaginary lines that we establish around ourselves to protect our body, heart and soul from the unhealthy and damaging behaviour of others. And that's a quote from Nicole Perry. She's a psychologist in Canada, and I am going to celebrate a lot of Nicole's earlier works and what we're discussing today. If any of us have found that uncomfortable tinge, that gut feel that somebody has stepped into our personal space, or maybe that we've overshared and walked away later going, oh, don't know whether I should have gone that far or not. Those are red flags that are helping you identify what your boundaries are. Boundaries are a prerequisite for compassion and empathy, and we can't connect with someone unless we're very clear where we end and they begin. Boundaries define us. If there's no autonomy between people, then there's no compassion or empathy, just enmeshment, where we all become chameleons in order to fit with somebody else's need. So what do boundaries do for me and you? They allow us to take time to care for ourselves and put our mental health as a top priority. They help us reduce resentment by allowing us to say no to things that we are unable or unwilling to do. That's a good thing. And they help us define who we are and who we are not. We actually need boundaries to be ourselves, essential to being a healthy adult. So boundaries are something learnt. They're not something that we are innately born with. It's something we experience and learn through experience. Setting boundaries allows us to live authentically, speaking and acting from our innermost convictions and feelings. And authenticity is what we're aiming for when we later talk about setting or restoring healthy boundaries for ourselves. Without boundaries, we often feel frustrated and resentful about the commitments we make. And that's a red flag right there. If you are begrudgingly just turned around and gone yes to something that doesn't fit right, you probably just stood on your own boundary there for a moment. We find ourselves exhausted at the end of the day without enough time left for things that are most important to us. That we're actually burning up our resources by not holding true to what our boundaries are. And we often are raised to take care of everyone else's needs before we take care of ourselves. Because as children, we do as we're told. We do to please. We are managed by the parents that raise us to a certain point in time. And therefore, there is that embedded rule that sits back in the back of our consciousness that we must somehow please others first. So just think, what do boundaries do for me? Are they doing what is useful, or are you marking off a few red crosses already that you'd like to address? Oh, now, forewarning, got a bit of John Cleese coming here. It's not Monty Python, but it's a little bit of feedback, a little bit of something, a little bit of wisdom as to how he has noticed that boundaries are crossed, and I'll leave the rest to him.
Scene in the movie. And that is the scene all the producers wanted to cut. So what's going on here? I think I can explain it. When we started to show Fish Caught Wonder, you know, the test screenings to audiences, we used to ask the audiences to fill out what we call an evaluation card. And they would be asked, what do you think of the music? Did you like the ending? And one of the questions was, what are the 3 funniest scenes in the movie for you? And when we added up the votes, we found the funniest scene was killing the dogs. The second funniest was Michael with the chips up his nose. And the third was me dancing around naked speaking Russian. Then at the back it said, what were the 3 most offensive scenes for you in the movie? And the 3 were killing the dogs, Michael with the chips up his nose, and me dancing. So what is going on here? Well, I think when you get into taboo areas, that is areas like dead bodies or limbs coming off or anything sexual, there's always a little bit of anxiety because it is taboo, you see, but for some people, just a few, there's a lot of anxiety. So when the subject is raised, they kind of freeze up, they feel very uncomfortable, and they hate it, and they hate the fact that people around them are laughing so much, and they say, I've been offended. However, most people just have a little bit of anxiety. So what happens if you make them laugh? You get an even bigger laugh than you do normally, because you get the normal laugh, and then you get the extra energy that comes from that little bit of anxiety being liberated. So you get huge laughs when you deal with taboo subjects, and that's one reason why my humor has a pretty black quality to it some of the time.
So you can see that within that are contradictory boundaries, where sometimes there are a lot of grey areas as opposed to just being clear. But what types of boundaries are we talking about that could be transgressed or crossed? Physical boundaries protect our personal space and body. And we can certainly notice that if, for say, we find ourselves on a subway or a crowded bus, that when people are compromising our personal space, usually what you'll find people will do in order to protect that physical boundary is that they will avoid eye contact. You could be 12 inches away from somebody, but they're not actually looking at each other. Emotional boundaries protect my thoughts and feelings. True. How we feel is something that often we don't want to be criticised or argued with. Verbal boundaries protect how we speak and what we discuss. How much do we share? Do we undershare? Do we overshare? And time boundaries protect how we spend our time. Do we hold true that we work from 8:30 to 5 p.m? The moment that clock hits 5 p.m, we're out the door. How close do we hold to our regular time routines? Work boundaries protect limits in the workplace. What are you willing to do and what are you not willing to do? What's in your job description? What are a few extras that you'd start to accommodate or agree with? And then spiritual boundaries protect my values and what I believe in. And often again, they are unspoken. But watch out if they're ever crossed. You'll know about it. And financial boundaries protect my finances and assets. And it's an interesting thing. It's also a cultural thing. Some countries speak quite openly about what their income is, what they earn, and so forth. Others, New Zealand for instance, it's almost offensive to turn around and ask somebody, hey, how much do you earn? What's your weekly pay? What do you get? And sexual boundaries protect my safety and preferences. And again, that's a learning, but it's also an unspoken thing, but something that is integral to intimate relationships. Now, when we get to the workplace, to our professional ethical boundaries, I came across this set of questions years ago, and oh my gosh, they are good. They've helped me in my practice, and I think that they could help you in your workplace, in your life as well. If you're in the helping professions, these are real doozies. The questions are intended to help care providers reflect on the ethical boundaries and is from the College of Psychologists in Ontario. asking yourself something along the lines of, before I do this, is this in my client's best interests? Who am I actually about to do this for? Is it for make me feel better, or is it for the client? Whose needs are being served if I choose to do this for the client? Am I engaging in some rescuing behaviour, or is it all about the client? Will this have an impact on the service I'm delivering if I choose to do this? What are the consequences if I choose to step up or step out of my lane? Should I consult with my supervisor or colleague before I choose to do this for the person that I'm helping? How would that land for a moment if you raised that with that supervisor? And am I treating this client differently, as if this client is special to me, to how I treat other clients? If you're going above and beyond, what is that about? Does that mean that that would raise a red flag, that there is a boundary that is being crossed, that maybe there are some personal interests that are starting to come into play in the professional role? Or to ask yourself, am I taking advantage of this client? Now you might think, no, we wouldn't go there. But if you have a client that is generous, that they're appreciative and they're generous and they're well resourced and they want to share that generosity with you, be careful. Another professional boundary to check is, will I be comfortable documenting my actions or behaviour on a client file that the client themselves could also access and read? Auditors could access and read. Statutory agencies may be able to access and read. How comfortable would that land with you if you happen to authentically and honestly note down what those actions were? And finally, asking yourself, am I acting in accordance with the code of conduct, values and ethical standards of my organisation, college or association? It's also a good checks and balance, because those codes of conduct and those standards have been well tested, and they're there for a reason, to help keep us safe and our clients safe in what can be a rather emotionally and psychologically demanding role in any helping profession. So the College of Psychologists in Ontario have certainly come up with a great wee checklist just to keep us safe. Now, for those of you who know Gestalt therapy, the author and creator of Gestalt therapy, Fritz Perls, came up with this real doozy of he calls it the Gestalt prayer, but it's something that truly does define clear boundaries. I do my thing and you do your thing. I'm not in this world to live up to your expectations, and you are not in this world to live up to mine. You are you and I am I. And if by chance we find each other, it's beautiful. If not, it can't be helped. Now, Fritz was very straightforward, straight shooter. There were no filters, it was just as it is. And this does beautifully define what professional boundaries could look like, with one exception, and that is, how would this land if you are in an organisation that is whose funding is reliant on positive outcomes and goal achievements for your client? You could quite easily say, goodbye, this isn't working out. This is what it is. But when the pressure is on to produce outcomes and statistics and results for your funders to then be satisfied with the work that you are putting out, then if not, it can't be helped, is certainly a boundary that can be placed under pressure. So what is the range of boundaries? Well, from the bottom end, we've got Thidwick, the big-hearted moose. Now, Thidwick down the far end there, is everybody aware of the Dr. Seuss story of Thidwick, the big-hearted moose? He was a chap that accommodated all those in need until eventually it was to near his detriment and he had to shake them loose. The weak end of the range of the boundaries is thin-skinned, where we say something, when someone says something negative about you, it immediately hurts. It gets you. Heart on the shirt sleeve. And has a large impact on your feelings about yourself. Taking other people's opinions of you or taking on others' feelings, their anxiety becomes your anxiety. You absorb what they're sending. On the other end of the spectrum is the rigid. Walls that protect, but if overused can keep us isolated from others and closed to the healing potential of vulnerability. It's very protective at that end of the spectrum. Walls of anger, words of preoccupation, silence, worry, depression, humour, pleasantry and seduction. This all allows us to feel safer, but the consequence is that we become cut off from life and sometimes ourselves. And this wee matronly teacher just says it all on the far end here. Very rules-based, very rigid, very strict, black and white. But ideally, we want to land in the middle. As far as the range of boundaries go, a healthy boundary is one that starts with a wall, but if something throws at you, you ask yourself, is it true for me or not? Is it questionable? If it's true for you, then you can let it slide down the wall like a raw egg, as it says here. Or if it's true, you can open your boundary and take it in. But when you take it in, you can have feelings about it, but the conscious of the fact is that you are something that it's not something that changes your worth. In other words, you are not adapting to that feedback. You're not adapting to change in order to suit. You yourself are in charge, not the external force. Now, sensitivity to boundaries, this is where we find the chameleon effect. That is where we're blind to what our boundaries are. We can allow ourselves to be determined by others. We can be violating our own boundary by disclosing too much too soon. That oversharing in order to be accepted. Trusting others too easily without giving them time to earn trust. Being unassertive or unwilling to say no, and taking on others' feelings. Imitating or being overly influenced by others, or lacking clear identity. And in a lot of ways, this is also developmental. Those are some of the developmental signposts of adolescence. As we learn who we are. What are we? Who are we? Where do we fit? Where do we belong? On the other end of the spectrum is oversensitivity, where we perceive boundary violations when they are unintended. We're reacting out of proportion to minor, unwitting violations. So this is a very raw end of the spectrum when it comes to sensitivity. Going back and forth between passiveness to aggressiveness, or using angry outbursts to distance people. Disengaging and avoiding relationships because relationships require vulnerability, and this end of the spectrum is not vulnerability. constantly trying to protect oneself and having difficulty negotiating the reciprocal nature of relationships. If you're oversensitive to boundary violations, then you'll find that you'll be running one way in transactions, communications. It's a one-way street. It's not a reciprocal situation. That imposing own needs on others or trying to control them is a sign of oversensitivity to boundaries. Lacking respect for individuals' need to be by themselves, which is leaning towards a bit of the over-controlling. Fear that by loving someone it means becoming dependent on them. Again, this end of the spectrum, avoid vulnerability, avoid any form of codependence, and ultimately lacking empathy. And our little wee cartoon at the bottom here, Gloria is amazing. She goes, harmony is no longer a part of Gloria's belief system. And there she is, she's armoured herself at that end of the spectrum of oversensitivity to boundary violation. Ideally, we want to land in the middle on there too. We're trusting those close to us who have earned our trust, and only then when they've earned it. Finding middle ground between passiveness and aggressiveness. And understanding that we can be independent and rely on others at the same time. Being in touch with how we feel and taking time to decide what is right for us. And allowing people to see who we are, small bits at a time. The tendency to overshare is mitigated. But ultimately, boundaries are tied to experiential learning in life. Mistakes are life's invitation to learn. And where do we learn what boundaries are? We learn them from childhood, we learn them from home. Family is the primary school of socialisation. Is through family, through interactions with our parents, our siblings, through growing up. We learn through experience, through making mistakes. How far you push something, how far you can push your own agenda, how far others can. How much are you willing to allow? How much are others willing to allow? Family being the primary school of socialisation is actually more of a university of life, because that's where you pick up and test out how our boundaries work. And dare I say it, that was a bad day in the office for that pilot. But one way or another, he too, or she did. She learnt how to park it a bit more quietly another day. There might have been some employment boundaries to revisit there too. So, what are some of the signs of unhealthy boundaries? My gosh, there's a few up on the board there. Telling all is one. Falling in love with a new acquaintance. In other words, just without any question, just diving head over heels. Not noticing other people's inappropriate boundaries. Now that can also be a conscious choice, just in order to win favour or to be accepted. Believing others can anticipate your needs. Ow. Now, it may well be that there are times where we find ourselves going, but, you know, it's not rocket science. You're meant to understand what I needed. When in reality, you're also asking for a bit of mind reading there too. giving as much as you can for the sake of giving, oversharing, or going against personal values or beliefs to please others. Oh my gosh. How many times have we said yes to something, either in the workplace or in our personal lives, and then gone, oh my God, do I really have to? Oh no, that day's fast approaching. I said yes, I said I'd do that, but at what cost? Taking on an intimate level at the first meeting. Life isn't just a speed dating challenge, especially when it comes to relationships that aren't intimate. And expecting others to fill your needs automatically. And you'll see here that a lot of these relate back to relationship building or relationships that are non-reciprocal, where it is more one way than another. Now, here's that wee video I was talking about. So in the first 15 seconds of this video, which does discuss sex in the context of making a cup of tea, that in the first 15 seconds, that there is some colourful language. But definitely consent is a boundary.
If you're still struggling with consent, just imagine instead of initiating sex, you're making them a cup of tea. You say, hey, would you like a cup of tea? They go, oh my God, fuck yes, I would fucking love a cup of tea, thank you. Then you know they want a cup of tea. If you say, hey, would you like a cup of tea? And they're like, I'm not really sure. Then you can make them a cup of tea, or not, but be aware they might not drink it. And if they don't drink it, then, and this is the important part, don't make them drink it. Just because you made it doesn't mean you are entitled to watch them drink it. And if they say no thank you, then don't make them tea, at all. Just don't make them tea. Don't make them drink tea. Don't get annoyed at them for not wanting tea. They just don't want tea, okay? They might say, yes please, that's kind of you. And then when the tea arrives, they actually don't want the tea at all. Sure, that's kind of annoying as you've gone to all the effort of making the tea, but they remain under no obligation to drink the tea. They did want tea, now they don't. Some people change their mind in the time that it takes to boil the kettle, brew the tea, and add the milk. And it's okay for people to change their mind. And you are still not entitled to watch them drink it. And if they're unconscious, don't make them tea. Unconscious people don't want tea. And they can't answer the question, do you want tea? Because they're unconscious. Okay, maybe they were conscious when you asked them if they wanted tea. And they said yes. But in the time it took you to boil the kettle, brew the tea, and add the milk, they are now unconscious. You should just put the tea down. Make sure the unconscious person is safe. And this is the important part again. Don't make them drink the tea. They said yes then, sure, but unconscious people don't want tea. If someone said yes to tea, started drinking it, and then passed out before they finished it, don't keep on pouring it down their throat. Take the tea away. Make sure they're safe, because unconscious people don't want tea. Trust me on this. If someone said yes to tea around your house last Saturday, that doesn't mean they want you to make them tea all the time. They don't want you to come around to their place unexpectedly and make them tea and force them to drink it going, but you wanted tea last week. Or to wake up to find you pouring tea down their throat going, but you wanted tea last night. If you can understand how completely ludicrous it is to force people to have tea when they don't want tea, and you're able to understand when people don't want tea, then how hard is it to understand it when it comes to sex? Whether it's tea or sex, consent is everything. And on that note, I'm going to go make myself a cup of tea.
And it does sound quite clear, doesn't it, when you hear it like that? But consent is also, takes other forms in life as well. And whether you may find that people are willing to engage in a therapeutic workplace contract, where the people are willing to engage in a service, but they're also equally allowed to go, actually, I've changed my mind, yeah, nah. But interestingly enough, and this can also be metaphorical for those people that you may find who are crusading. And crusading is something to watch out for, because crusading is advocating without any care or concern for the consequences of what you're trying to promote, where damage and collateral damage is not taken into account or is a concern, where boundary crossing is not part of that narrative. Crusading might look good, might sound good, might be something that you might feel, wow, that's great, look at them go. But it's not necessarily that good for others if those boundaries are being trampled upon. And see if I can get this one here. So what are signs of healthy boundaries? Well, obvious, not abusing self or others. It's a good first up. Respecting yourself and others is a great place to start. Taking responsibility for yourself. Saying, hey, for me, this is what is good. For me, this is what I require. Having the ability to say no and not feeling guilty about it. Learning to respect others' territory as well as your own. Hey, I've got my role. Oh, Bob over there's got his role. And respecting each other's lane. Developing a sense of yourself and your rights. Knowing where you stand and standing strong in that. And professional ethics. Professional ethics keep us safe because they're there to support us. Developing appropriate family roles. There's always got to be someone in charge and someone that follows. Being able to set limits with others and yourself, and do so in a way which is actually celebrating you and still upholding their mana as well. Being able to trust yourself and go, hey, you know what? This is what I need to do for me right now. I'm going to back myself. And defined work roles. Those defined work roles, those job descriptions, are there for good reason, as are the policies and protocols. And for many people, workplace policies or procedures or protocols it's kind of sit in one of those nefarious little folders in the back storeroom, and you kind of go, okay, I read them once when I first started up on the job, but oh my God, put it back on the shelf. The reality is that those procedures and protocols and policies are great. They clearly lay out what our bounds are in the work that we do. And also learning that you are complete in and of yourself. You are enough, and acknowledging that. So how do we set boundaries? Well, first off, as Paul has mentioned here on the right-hand side of the screen, when you say yes to others, make sure you're not saying no to yourself, first and foremost. Notice the red flags. If you are beginning to feel angry, threatened, suffocated, whiny or victimised, These feelings indicate that boundaries need to be set. Pay attention to what your body is trying to tell you. In your own time, setting boundaries occurs at your pace when you are ready, not sooner, because this is connected, integrally connected to your own personal growth. If you're not ready to step out and really put that challenge, because it's a challenge to you and the other people around you, do it when you're ready. When you identify that you need to set a boundary with another person, do it in a clear, non-threatening manner, using as few words as possible. No need to justify, rationalise or apologise. Just say, hey, for me, I can't do that right now. Remember that setting a boundary and taking care of another person's feelings cannot be accomplished at the same time. True. If you have to choose between guilt and resentment, choose guilt every time. It's easier to live with. Be ready to enforce the boundary that has been set, because people will test it. Because we all become accustomed to each other's scripts. The scripts are the rules and the transactions that we all live by. People get to learn to know what you say yes to, what you'll give in to, what you'll agree to. So once you start putting a new boundary in place and saying, well, actually, no, I'm not working to 5:10 each night now. And you have a manager or somebody that comes to you and says, oh, look, it's 5 minutes to 2, but could you just complete this? I need it tomorrow. Hang on a minute. Once you start saying no, there will become challenges. And if you say yes, 2-3 weeks down the track, out of sheer routine and expectation, that person might come back at you again and go, but look, we've only got a few closing minutes in a day, could you get this report done for me? Hang on a minute. Be prepared to act consistently with respect to your boundaries. Boundaries need to match your behaviour. They're used to take control of ourselves, but not control others. That consistency, our actions must match our words when we put a new boundary in place. That's all part of backing yourself and sending a clear message to others. 7, develop a support system to help obtain feedback about what's normal and what isn't. Have that go-to person say, hey look, Muriel, I've just decided that, really doing that extra couple of hours in the week, I don't know if I can really carry that forward any longer. Do you think I should just step out and say, yeah, nah? Do you think I'd get away with it? What do you think? So you're using other people that you trust as sounding boards to see whether the healthy boundaries you require are going to land right and not have too detrimental an outcome or consequence. Remind yourself that there's a fun side to setting boundaries as we learn to identify what we like, feels good, and what we want, and what brings pleasure. Because those boundaries may deliver you more you time, more quality time with activities or loved ones that fill your cup instead of emptying them. And 9, educate others on how to respect your new boundaries. If somebody comes back at you and says, but, you go, no, hang on a minute. This is a learning curve for me, it's a learning curve for you too. Therefore, I'm going to help you along the way. And me saying no, this is what you can do to follow me in this. And make a list of the top 10 things you will not tolerate around you. When you've got a quiet moment, the top 10 things, such as someone putting you down with digs, negative remarks or criticism, or others. It may be that you, in order to people please have said yes to everyone. But the problem is that you become known as that yes person that pleases everybody and puts everybody else first. So in that top 10, you're going to start to develop a clearer sense of where your new boundary setting is going to lie. Having a plan of action to inform people around you of what you're going to do and request they stop immediately. It could well be that there are expectations of others which continually land at your feet. Make sure that you try and deal with these issues in the moment. If they don't stop, walk away without any snappy comments, but stick to your plan. Make a list of the top 10 ways you are violating other people's boundaries. Now that might be the case too. If you are benefiting from those agreeable yes people around you, and maybe benefiting to the point where you go, actually, you know, when I look at this, maybe I just need to back off the pressure that I'm putting, or the expectations I'm putting on others. Thank those who are respecting your boundaries. If you've made a change in your workplace, if you've made a change in your personal life, that whoever has actually gone, okay, yeah, I'm with you on that. You do you. You do what you need to do. That you thank them and say, hey, look, thanks for backing me on this. I need to do this for me. And keep hope alive, as setting boundaries is a skill you can master. It takes time, but eventually you will get there. And it may be that those strong feelings of guilt or resentment, it may be holding you back in creating some of those changes. But just remember, once you've created that change, you've created a whole new narrative and shifted other people's expectations of you too. It's an inward change that also has outward consequences. And set your boundaries as a way to love yourself. This is about what's right for you. Give compassion to yourself when you make mistakes. And remember that it does get easier. Sometimes you will walk away from a situation or circumstance and say, actually, I didn't open up that much, or I didn't give that person a chance. Or, oh my God, I just told them my whole life story. What's going to happen next? And that's where you get that disclosure hangover. And sometimes we see it in counselling practice as well, where a client will come in and they may just do a data dump, just an information dump in that first session, and then they don't show up for the second because they've just told you their whole life story and they can't bear to face seeing you that second time round. So that oversharing, that information hangover can be brutal at times for people. Also in the dating field, I believe, too. And ask yourself, if I don't take care of myself, now who will? Because if you're no good to yourself, you're no good to others. Something came out of my own Irish heritage there. So being good to yourself, first and foremost, puts you in the best position possible to then be the most effective helper for others. Oh, now, Brené Brown had this beautiful saying, and that is, daring to have boundaries is about having the courage to love ourselves, even when we risk disappointing others. That be true. It does take courage, and it does take courage to create change when it comes to boundary setting. Now there's one more I just want to share. Now, Schopenhauer's porcupine parable is what I'd like to finish on, this wee prickly subject. On a cold winter's day, a group of porcupines huddled together to stay warm and keep from freezing, but soon they felt one another's quills and they moved apart. When the need for warmth brought them closer together again, their quills again forced them apart. They were driven back and forth at the mercy of their discomforts until they found the distance from one another that provided both maximum warmth and minimum of pain. Now, in human beings, the emptiness of monotony of the isolated self produces a need for society. This brings people together, but their many offensive qualities and intolerable faults drive them apart again. The optimum distance that they finally find that permits them to coexist is embodied in politeness and good manners. Because of this distance between us, we can only partially satisfy our need for warmth, but at the same time, we are spared the stab of one another's quills. When you think about it, a lot of truth to that. But ultimately, they say, good fences make good neighbours. And that's for a reason. And on that note, thank you, Arthur Schopenhauer. We call it an end. So thank you very much for listening and coming today. And any questions, by all means, yell out.
Oh, that's so bright, isn't it? Thank you very much, Matt. Anyone who begins a presentation with John Cleese has got my ear. I love John Cleese. I was teaching years ago with a British teacher, and she was very musical, and when it came time at assembly for her class to do something, she always did something musical. And I'll never forget when she did this song called No One Talks to Anyone on Buses. No one seems to have a single word to say. And she'd have the kids sitting in seats, one behind the other, and like that. And I never quite grasped it until the other day I was listening to a podcast, and in the UK, you don't talk to anybody on the buses or in the subway or anything. And I mean, that's difficult for us to understand, but that's just the way they do it. They sit there very quiet and you don't interact, you keep your head down and you don't interact. In Hong Kong, where I used to live, no one talks to anybody on buses, but that's because they're all busy with their devices, playing games, watching videos. They'll have an earplug in, they'll be watching a movie and all sorts of things on the trains and the buses. But when we were tourists in China, and then I was also a tourist in West Africa and caught the train, people did talk to us. People did shared their meals with us. So boundaries are different wherever you go too. And there's that social side. So my family boundaries are different from your family boundaries. My Australian boundaries are slightly different from your New Zealand boundaries. So everything's different, and you've got to adjust and adapt wherever you go. And be a little bit flexible with your boundaries, as Matt said much earlier in his presentation. I really enjoyed the Gestalt prayer too, very meaningful, and I'm going to go and Google it and put it up on my wall. I used to teach kids to read, and I loved using Green Eggs and Ham as the book to teach kids to read. Today I wouldn't dare bring it out, right? Because it's about consent. And Matt's mentioned consent when he did his talk. That little guy that harasses the man to get him to eat the green eggs and ham. And it's such a funny story, and it makes a great little cartoon and so on. But it's wrong, isn't it? To persevere and keep going, like the cup of tea. So I am an ex-green eggs and ham fan. I loved it because Green Eggs and Ham, it only uses 50 English words, just a little bit of trivia to take away with you. It only uses 50 English words. And so it's really good when you're teaching reading to kids who struggle with reading, because they only have to learn 50 words. Yeah. Anyway, thanks so much, Matt. It was very meaningful. And take that with you, where you work, where you live, where you play. Think about your own boundaries and the boundaries of other people, and respect each other's boundaries. And let's do things a bit better. And then the other thing I think too, don't take things personally. If somebody has a boundary and they're not going to do what you want to do or what you want them to do, you have to respect their boundary and not take it personally. And that's what I had to learn over the years. I'm always one, I would take things very personally and get hit. My feelings would get hurt. And somebody said to me, you shouldn't really have feelings that get hurt, not in this area. Or you shouldn't let things, people say you shouldn't let things rub you up the wrong way, but somebody said you shouldn't have a wrong way to be rubbed up. So don't take things personally when people are exercising their own boundaries. Today, I would really love it, but I won't insist. But with your consent, if you would fill in the feedback form, that would be lovely. And you can make a cup of tea or coffee, and I'm going to get the snacks out and put them on the table. Please stay and network with each other and enjoy, I'm calling it munch. It's a late morning tea and an early lunch. So thank you so much for coming. And I really hope that you can put this into practice, because I've learnt in my professional life and personal life, this is really important. To understand your boundaries, understand other people's boundaries, and work within them, and adapt when you're in different situations. So thank you so much, Matt, and thank you to every one of you who came today. It's really a pleasure to see you. Thank you.
Thank you.
So just putting this